What if counter trap cards were in Magic the Gathering? Counter trap cards are cards that must be set on the field in order to be activated, designated by the arrow symbol next to the card's type, with effects that prevent a player from performing certain actions. Let's start things off with Magic Drain, a counter trap card with the effect when your opponent activates a spell card, they can discard one spell card to negate the card's effect. Otherwise, negate the activation of the spell card, and if you do, destroy it. If this card were to be converted into magic, it would become a 2-cost instant spell with 2 black and 1 generic, and the effect counter target sorcery or instant spell, unless its controller discards 1 card. To start things off, this card becomes a 2-cost spell, as that is the standard rate for counter spells in Magic, and while it's worse than the original counter spell, with it having an easy way to dispel itself, and countering less cards, Magic Drain would still see play, as it doesn't require any blue mana to cast, giving black decks an easy way to counter spells without needing blue in their mana pool. This card has a black cost to it, as giving your opponents the option of discarding cards to prevent card effects is most common for black cards to have. Magic Drain becomes an instant spell, letting you activate its effects during each player's turns. And although you can use trap cards during either player's turn, they must first be set down on the field for at least one of either player's turns before it can be activated, being more synonymous to a quick play spell card, letting you play it immediately on your turn or your opponent's. Magic the Gathering generally doesn't limit when you can use a spell, so long as it has a keyword that allows you to play it whenever you want. Before we go any further, it's important to mention how card priority works in Yu-Gi-Oh!, with every card having a spell speed associated to it, with higher spell speeds preventing a player from responding to card effects, unless it has an equal or higher spell speed. Spell speed 1 are normal spell cards, being the equivalent to sorcery spells. Spell speed 2 or normal trap cards, quick play spells, and monster effects that declare their spell speed 2, being much like instant spells. Spell speed 3 being counter trap cards, what the obsolete keyword interrupt used to be, as, if you don't know, interrupts were spells that could be played on either player's turns, just like instant spells. However, they had a higher priority than normal instant spells, meaning that if you had a hand full of instant spells, you would have to wait until your opponent's interrupts resolved before you could interact with your opponent's board, making interrupt spells the bare minimum spell speed if you wanted to interact with your opponent before they created an unbreakable board state. And spell speed 4 are cards that can't be responded to when they are played, essentially cards that cannot be countered when they are cast. If I say true to how priority works in Yu-Gi-Oh!, I would make each of the cards a split second, forcing each player to respond to this card before continuing the stack. However, since all counter spells have been changed from interrupts to instants, I'll leave them as normal instant spells. The next card up is Dark Bribe, a counter trap card with the effect when your opponent activates a spell or trap card, your opponent draws 1 card. Also, negate the activation of the spell or trap card, and if you do, destroy it. If this card were in Magic, it would become a 2-cost instant spell with 1 black and 1 red, and the effect counter target non-creature spell. Its owner draws 1 card. This card has a red and black cost, with black gaining advantage with a downside, as it lets your opponent go hand neutral in exchange for stopping any 1 non-creature spell, and red since it's a bribe to make the problematic card go away. Letting your opponent draw a card isn't as big a deal as it is in Yu-Gi-Oh!, with a standard Magic deck being much bigger at 60 cards, 20 cards bigger than the minimum 40 card deck size in Yu-Gi-Oh!, as well as the fact that Magic players must incorporate a large amount of land cards into their deck to generate mana for their spells, lowering the chances of drawing an important spell even further. Next card up is Horn of Heaven, a counter trap card with the effect when a monster would be summoned, tribute one monster, negate the summon, and if you do, destroy all those monsters. Converting this card gets us a 2-cost instant spell with 1 white, 1 blue, and the effect, as an additional cost to cast Horn of Heaven, sacrifice a creature you control, counter all other creature spells. This card has a white cost associated to it because it has Heaven in its title. This card costs 2 converted mana, as even though it's extremely limited in what it can counter, being only creature spells and requiring a creature to be sacrificed in order to be played, it also targets all creature spells instead of just your opponent's, as counter spells that affect all cards target both players' cards. You could counter multiple creature spells if your opponent has creatures that summon themselves at instant speed. We've been converting a lot of counter trap cards into Magic, but I don't think you're ready for the counter trap, which is, you guessed it, a counter trap card with the effect negate the activation of a counter trap card and destroy it. If counter were to be converted into Magic, it would become a 1-cost instant spell with the effect counter target blue instant spell. The reason why counter targets blue instant spells is because a majority of counter spells have a blue cost, and all of those spells are at instant speed. While this may seem to be a massive bonus that counter can counter any blue instant spell for 1 mana, this requirement is still very limiting, as there are many other blue cards you would like to counter that aren't instant spells, especially since there are these cards called Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast, both costing 1 red mana to counter any blue spell, or the secondary effect, destroy any blue permanent. The next card to be converted is Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell, a counter trap card with the effect when a spell card is activated, discard 1 spell, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. And if you do that, your opponent cannot activate spell cards with that name for the rest of the duel. Converting this card gets us a 4-cost instant spell with 2 blue and 2 black, and the effect, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, choose an instant or sorcery card name, counter target spell with the chosen name, and if you do, opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name for the rest of the game. This card costs 4 color mana to cast, as well as the additional cost to discard a card, since you could potentially win games if you sniped a win condition or cast themselves multiple times a game. Next card up is Divine Wrath, a counter trap with the effect when a monster's effect is activated, discard 1 card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. If this card were to be converted into Magic, it would become a 2-cost instant spell with 1 white and 1 red, with the effect, as an additional cost to cast Divine Wrath, discard a card, counter target activated or trigger ability from a creature source. Mana abilities cannot be targeted. If a creature's ability is countered this way, destroy that creature. This card has a red and white cost, as red cards also discard cards as an additional cost, and white's here because of its name as Divine Wrath. The last card we will be converting is Solemn Judgment, a counter trap card with the effect when monsters would be summoned or a spell or trap card is activated, pay half your life, negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. If this card were to be converted into Magic, it would become a 2-cost instant spell with 1 white and 1 black, with the effect as an additional cost to cast Solemn Judgment, pay half your life, rounded up, counter target spell. Although this card requires half of your life total, being able to counter any card for 2 non-blue mana is not something to scoff at, as for the few non-blue cards that can counter spells, they are often limited to counter 1 type of color or 1 small spell type, like Red Elemental Burst, targeting only blue cards, or Withering Boon, a 2-cost, 1 black, and 1 generic instant spell that counters only creature spells, with the additional cost of 3 life. Solemn Judgment has a black cost, because paying half your life is exclusive to black cards, and I really shouldn't tell you why white's in here. The card's title is Solemn Judgment. If there's anything I should have changed, or any ideas on cards I should convert next, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, you should check out this one where I converted meld cards into fusion monsters.
I disable the effect that disables the effect that disables the effect!
And I disable that effect that disables the effect that disables the effect that disables the effect!